Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to the ShadowDragon Podcast. This is season 3, episode 12, and today we have a special guest from our ShadowDragon team. Before I do that, I want to do a quick round. We already know a little bit about you, but can you please introduce yourself, David?
Yeah, David Cook, Director of National Security here at ShadowDragon.
And myself, Nico Dekens, better known as DutchOSINTGuy for most folks who are in the OSINT realm, Director of Intelligence and Collection Innovation at ShadowDragon, and lastly, but certainly not least, our very well appreciated colleague, Jake Robinson. Jake, hi.
Hi.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I just want to say thanks for letting me come out of the cave and be put in front of people. Appreciate that. No, Jake Robinson. I'm the director of product here at ShadowDragon, and it's about 1 year that I've been here. So basically, just working with the dev team and working with all the customers and everything to kind of guide the direction of the product. So that's what
Yeah,
I.
very well needed and very well appreciated within our team. So before you joined us, you had a different life working at the US government. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you did and in your previous working life before you started at ShadowDragon?
Sure. Yeah, so out of high school, I went straight into being a computer science major, University of Kansas, Rock Chalk Jayhawk. Found out that DiffyQ and linear algebra weren't really for me, so joined the Army and became an Intel analyst there. And I was doing a tour in Iraq toward the end of my enlistment contract and was doing some work with three-letter agencies and seeing some of the cool stuff that they do. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So as soon as I got out, went back to school to finish up. Tried to find out, what do these agencies want? They wanted political science majors, so that's what I switched to. Applied immediately when I got back, didn't hear back. Says on the website, wait a year to apply again. So I waited a year, applied again, heard nothing. Waited another year, applied, and the third time was the charm, I guess, because then I, got put into the process. So several months after that, we moved out to the DC area and started working as a targeter there at the CIA. So that's how I got there. And then there's actually a few different types of targeting jobs that the CIA has. There's targeting analysts, which is the one that I was never really involved with. They do kind of more strategic level stuff. And then there's human targeters and tech targeters. I did a little both of those. So basically, as a targeter, your job is to get the intelligence requirements that the different stakeholders have, and figure out how do we get answers to those questions. So whether that's finding the right person that has the access to information that you can try to recruit, or whether it's some kind of technical operation that you can do, just finding out as much as you can about those targets and then passing it on to the operation people who can make those things happen. So it was a really cool job. I got to work on several different topics, mostly cybersecurity stuff, and nation state actors. So it was really cool. And 7 years later, I came over to the private sector, and I've been in product management since then.
So very interesting. Yeah, and for me, just knowing how that works, or giving our audience a little bit of a grasp of how the life of a CIA targeted looks like, very interesting to hear that background. And for me, just to generally understand, of course, if you can disclose, how much open source intelligence is part of being a targeter. Do you use open sources, or is it only closed source or human? Because that's definitely something that I don't know. We don't have a CIA in my country. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so open source is huge. And then, of course, we have different ways that getting some of that stuff that is kind of open source adjacent. So honestly, the way that it was handled, at least back then, like I said, it's been about 5 years now since I was in. It was really a pretty stark division between who could access open source information, who was accessing closed source information. So it was while it was very important to the targeting, and could have been so much easier if I had just had direct access to the OSINT myself. It was more of a process, and I think they're working on that now and making it so that everybody has access to that open source information. But I became best friends with the people who did have access to it, and it is absolutely vital to being able to in both human and tech targeting, to just be able to find out as much as you can about those targets, patterns of life, what people's motivations might be, things like that. So it's super important.
Yeah, so that kind of reminds me of my previous job where I supported the Dutch Secret Service a little bit. Does it also mean that, for example, if you have a human asset and they came back with a story, that you use open sources to validate that story or to see if there's discrepancies in that? Is that correct? Is that correct assumption that I'm making here?
Yeah, that's one use for it. That usually wasn't the targeters that did that, but there were people, that was one of the ways that it was used there for sure.
Okay, very interesting insights. So, when we talk about it, and when we talk about your background, and when we talk about what we do within ShadowDragon when it comes to maybe exploring a certain topic or a certain individual, the past week has been very interesting again in the geopolitical landscape. We've seen that a lot of things are now happening in Syria. We've seen that Assad now basically fled his country, got asylum in Russia. So just a very general question to both of you. Syria, why is that important to us? Why should we care? Why does it matter from an open source intelligence perspective in general?
Well, I mean, I think that Syria is really kind of a microcosm of the wider geopolitical picture that's going on across the world. So you have, different elements playing out. You have terrorism there that everybody in the world is trying to stop, with ISIS that's still kind of clinging on a little bit. You have the struggle between Russia and the United States playing out, who are both backing different groups there. You even have, an example where Turkey, who's a NATO member, is kind of doing their own thing that's not necessarily in line with the U.S. And I think just a huge number of all those different kind of really important geopolitical undercurrents are all kind of in the magnifying glass there and all kind of thrown together. So I think that's one reason
Yeah.
that it's interesting.
So when I looked at it, for example, in my time when I did a lot of counterterrorism work, looking at it, it's for me that region is just a proxy war region. Just to simplify this a little bit for our audience, and where we have countries like the U.S. as well as Russia, as Iran, having, let's say, a need to have a form of influence in that region because they have different goals there. So they need to control maybe stakeholders like labeled terrorist groups or other groups in there. I remember vividly, I needed to look into, for example, Jabhat al-Nusra most of my time because they were closely affiliated to Islamic State at that point in time. And now we, of course, see that HTS, and I'm trying to pronounce this because I'm really bad at this. So HTS, Hajat Tahrir al-Sham, and I'm very sorry if I don't pronounce it correct. They are now basically trying to run the country. I think that's the correct way to say this. So how I look at this now, and I just want you both to chip in, I'm trying to use, for example, our monitoring tools to understand who is involved, what key players, key groups and regions are now active in that region, and trying to control that. And it will help me pivot and understand who those key players are, and basically help me find my focus. Because, for example, I'm very interested in finding out if we can anticipate maybe new terrorist attacks all around the world from a newly revived version of Islamic State, for example. How do you both, maybe David, you can answer that. How do you look at this current shift in the political landscape in Syria, and how we can use our technology or in general open source intelligence to understand a little bit more in depth what's going on there?
Yeah, just to start out with, I thought I worked a lot in the Arabian Peninsula. I thought Yemen was hard, and my time in Syria, you need like triple PhDs to understand all the stakeholders out there. But there's one advantage for all the OSINTers out there that want to keep a close eye on Syria, is that a lot of people get their news from social media. And I've been monitoring a lot of Telegram chats all this week, and a lot of times I'm getting that information before Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all that. So it's very real time, and you can really telegraph what's happening if you have, experience and know the geography and the players there. And I will say that I think this is probably, if you take a step back, um, Syria looks like it's lining up to be a little more dangerous than, Iraq and Afghanistan were, because the whole point of U.S. presence in the Middle East after 9/11 was to deny these terrorist organizations freedom of movement and the freedom to constitute. And Syria just got, HTS just knocked off Assad, and put him in, in exile in Moscow. And we traded that out for HTS, which is a foreign terrorist organization whose leader, Al-Jawlani, has a $10 million bounty on his head by U.S. State Department. So that's a really big swath of land that's got, no rule.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm exactly what you just said. By just monitoring the scatter from social media, from sources like Discord or Telegram, or maybe even X or something like that, and basically any social media platform has helped me, for example, understand that they are immediately trying to instate Sharia law, for example. And that for me is very interesting to see. It's not a surprise, but just being able to grab that information before it hits the mainstream news helps us understand what might be popping up. But also learning about, for example, what I found personally very interesting when they found Assad his secret garage with all of these expensive cars. From an open source intelligence perspective, for me, it was a gold mine because now I could see the cars and maybe I can use specialized OSINT tools to track down how he got these cars, how he bought these cars. So maybe who he's doing business with, who he knows, what is his network when it comes to finances and all that stuff. So it's all about finding these little nuances. And I think with all the capabilities of being able to translate a foreign language that I can't read and can't understand, but having the capability of still being able to scan it based upon certain keywords and then automatically have it translate into a language that I can understand, you can quickly sift through, let's say, imported messages and payloads that may have an impact directly on your organization, for example, or just in general to understand that geopolitical landscape. Now, I want to get back a little bit more on your comment on Giuliani. Maybe Jake, you can chip in from an OSINT perspective, knowing that he now is the main puppeteer here, or he's trying to rule that country in that region of the world. How would you approach this, trying to map out, for example, his middle layer of management that is trying to pull certain strings? Is that something you think we can do within monitoring? Can we understand a little bit more from that, or maybe graphing out the network or something like that?
Well, I think it's definitely possible to do that with OSINT tools, and I think one of the things to keep in mind is, this coalition of different groups that were successful in overthrowing the Syrian government is really a bunch of strange bedfellows that are definitely not going to keep getting along now that their primary objective that they did all share is out of the way. So I think that kind of to your point, Nico, there's going to be a lot of public posturing probably between these groups who all have their own channels that they put out information, and it's always, these groups have always had media departments, and they make videos, and a lot of times different the different powers, foreign powers that they're working with, or maybe helping them with messaging and things like that. So I think just by kind of keeping an eye on all these different groups, and even just what they're publicly saying without having to dive into anything, you'll find any hidden secrets. You'll be able to start to see kind of how power might be shifting, just based on what they're saying, and who's involved in each of those groups that might be part of that conversation, because they're probably going to come up. If one group's promoting their guy to be the prime minister or whatever. These are all things that you'll be able to see in that kind of public discourse and the information that they're putting out. And then, with a tool like Horizon, once you are monitoring all of that, you're going to see different leads, different names pop up, and then you can really dive into those and find out, everything there is to know about them that's out there on the web. So I think, in that way, it's a huge, huge benefit to be able to keep tabs on what's going on at that level.
Yeah. An interesting nugget that I found this morning just by monitoring in our tools is being able to see images and footage from Assad's secret bunkers that he used to hide, and just understanding how these bunkers are set up and how well protected he is, maybe from let's say a military perspective, is a gold mine, because now you know what that infrastructures and how these tunnels are looking like, but now you also know where they physically are. So if you have that opportunity to maybe take him out with bunker busters or something like that, now you know a little bit more what kind of tools you may want to use to take those things out. So again, monitoring for specific topics of interest or specific regions will really supercharge your overall intelligence and knowledge that you may want to have. So since we're already talking about monitoring, I want to shift a little bit to another thing that happened last week in the United States, where we had that assassination of the CEO Thompson of United Healthcare. Now, what I want to touch upon, since we're talking about monitoring in general, we know the suspect now, or the alleged suspect, is arrested. One thing that we have been discussing internally, that as soon as he was exposed publicly or his name came out, it became, first of all, pretty easy to map out his existing online footprint. So you know where he has accounts, on what platforms, what he has been said. So it gives you a little bit of insight on what made that individual tick, how he thinks, or what his opinions are on certain topics, especially, of course, related to United Healthcare. But I think the thing that I want to discuss with both of you, how important is it for other similar CEOs or companies to understand their online footprint to mitigate potential risk? Is it something that companies should do, in your opinion? And if so, how can they achieve these goals to protect themselves a little bit better from online predators?
Jake, go ahead.
Oh,
You,
okay, sure. Yeah, so I think kind of there's a couple different aspects to it. So one is being able to identify where the threats are going to be coming from in the first place, because you don't always have the name of a person to be watching or something like that. So I think for kind of that overall kind of having that overall overhead view of what's happening and where the threats are at, where you need to be looking, is really important to be able to monitor some of these different, whether it's social media feeds, whether it's something like Telegram, where groups that are, ideologically opposed maybe to your type of business, whatever that is. I think there's always some kind of group that's mad about something that, different industries are involved in. So, on step one, monitoring those kind of groups is super important, and having the ability to monitor, several groups in several places, and being able to kind of pick through that noise, because there's so much data out there to be able to find, hey, here's a real threat versus just here's somebody who's upset about something. And I think it's even getting harder and noisier, because this might just be my opinion, but I think over the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, people have gotten a lot more violent in their rhetoric, and it's a lot more accepted to say, I want to kill this person because I don't agree with them or something like that. So, I think, having the ability to see all of that data and be able to kind of dig into where the real threats are coming from in the first place is important. And then when you do have a lead, like you say, somebody in one of these groups that you're monitoring is saying something that's maybe a more specific type of threat, really being able to dive into their online profile and fingerprint and see, okay, now what's that person saying other places? Who are they associated with? And kind of really getting a better picture of, okay, who do we need to worry about? What kind of protection do we need to have? And things like that. So,
yeah, I
The
think
kind of what we talked about in a previous podcast again. So we're trying to monitor people that show emotions online in general, right? So if we can find the emotion, then the next step is trying to make a good assessment on how serious that posted emotion is by an individual or a group of individuals. So, David, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think I'll be back to the original question. I think if a company or an organization isn't using publicly available information to at least do a threat assessment, at the very least around big events and specific events that are going to be public. I mean, the CEO, Brian Thompson, tragic that he was killed. He was on his way to an investor day for United Healthcare. So, that's an easy catalyst to kind of monitor around and do an assessment for. And a lot of these CEOs, this is the double-edged sword, is that you have to be public to be relevant. And so, monitoring those threats coming in and, what's an emotion or what is credible, and digging into those threats and those accounts and those entities, and a lot of the indicators around those threats, right? For example, the event was in New York. If somebody's making a threat and they're, based in Paris, probably not a big threat. But some of those, and I'll add too, after Brian Thompson was killed, we've seen a market uptick in some of the really just nasty comments about taking out CEOs. I mean, I was looking at it today, and people are looking at, U.S. congressmen and senators who have taken dollars from United Healthcare, and you have to think, what are the follow-on effects of these types of events?
Yeah, and just in general, it could also help you now reconsider how important it is to do an online footprint assessment on how easy it is for an evildoer to find you and trace you down if you are in that position and role. Because sometimes I'm amazed. You just said it, you nailed it. Like, these people have to be public, they have to be out there, but you can still have a balance in how much should we really put out there. Should we have, for example, the entire agenda out there available for everybody to know beforehand where they will be visiting certain events? Or should we keep that to ourselves? If they have private accounts, their private life, should they show where they are having dinner that night? And which may help someone figure out that there's hotels near, so they could be staying there. So I think for a lot of Fortune-ish kind of companies, or in general, large private companies, it is really good to do assessments multiple times a year to understand how easy it is for a threat actor to find either your digital infrastructure and do evil things, or to physically attack you. We've seen similar things when it comes to protests in general, where people are attacking financial institutions by smashing their windows. And most of these protests are pre-announced, so you can get that heads up. So you can maybe hire some extra security to protect your buildings or to protect your employees just by scanning the internet, finding that scanner, and having that little nudge heads up. Now,
Can I add one thing to that, Nico?
of course, please.
Before we change topic, I wanted to say too, even people who are very careful about information they put out, maybe they're not even on social media, and so they might think there's that risk at least is not something they need to worry about. There's a lot of data that's out there that has been stolen and put on the internet. So there's these different hacktivist groups, and all different kinds of hackers that are trying to make money or whatever, and all that data ends up, that's where it's accessible to all kinds of people. So also just being able to see, okay, besides what I've intentionally put out there, what's out there that's been stolen and put on the internet. Maybe there's my address, which I couldn't find anywhere else, but it's been leaked, or a list of who's in my family, or maybe there's some other information that could be used against me for blackmail or things like that. If you know what's out there and you know what's available, then at least you can try to mitigate the risk from those.
Yeah. Now, another maybe last thing to close off this podcast for today. A little side effect that we all have been noticing internally at ShadowDragon: the suspect or alleged suspect was caught, which meant that people online will start digging. We have these armchair investigators, and they start exposing information. I think it's also partially, we could probably even call it doxing to some extent. But what also means that there will be pranksters, jokesters out there that will start setting up accounts on numerous platforms pretending to be the suspect. And they might be sharing content on there that might get interpreted as the real deal. And that's what I've been seeing in the past 24 hours, that there are now numerous accounts out there that have the suspect's name, that have his profile picture, that are sharing content or opinions to make him either look good or even worse than he already looked like. Another example is, for example, that we can see in Scatter that the suspect allegedly had a manifesto on him that was handwritten. I don't know if it's true. I can't validate it. I don't have access because that's, for me now, closed source information. I think those local authorities may have that information. But now you have people sharing a manifesto online that allegedly is coming from that suspect, which is not a handwritten manifesto. So how sure am I that that's the real deal? So all I want to say here to the audience in general, especially when you have a ongoing event or something that happened recently, chances are pretty high that either platforms will start deleting the content from the original suspect. So you need to be fast. This is why we at ShadowDragon give you the capability to, in real time, only collect the information. If the information is deleted, we are no longer able to get that information because it's no longer open source. It's no longer publicly available. But the downside could also be that you stumble upon accounts that have that username or that email address that the suspect allegedly may have used that is not actually from the real individual. So how can we tackle that? So you need to be very skeptical in all the artifacts that you may come across. Any thoughts on that, David?
Oh man, you just gotta dig, really. And I think that one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about Syria earlier was the timeline feature within Horizon and plugging those things in. That way you have a chronological view of artifacts that you have. I think that's probably the most important is how long have these accounts been up? How long has the artifact been on the internet? I mean, that's the biggest I think indicator of what's real and what's not. Yeah, that's all I got there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, the timeline, because I was looking into that actually by doing some digging, and I noticed again that at least a handful of accounts were created after he was arrested. So either he would have had a laptop or a mobile device in his cell, which is highly unlikely to set up accounts and start sending information. But for me, it helps me sift quickly through those large volumes of data and say, okay, most likely not important. Doesn't mean that I won't look at it in detail, but it helps me find my focus. Where do I want to spend time on most initially in my investigation? Jake, do you have any opinions or visions on when it comes to this topic?
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the good thing about a lot of open source tools is that you can get data that's not as easy to see if you're just going to somebody's Facebook page, for instance. So a lot of that metadata you're talking about, dates when videos were posted, dates when accounts were created, things like if it's an account that has 1 or 2 friends, it's less likely to be real. And all of that information is very important, and it's pretty easily accessible in a tool like Horizon. So it really helps with that vetting process that you're talking about.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, it was a pleasure again to be on this podcast. And I invite the audience, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to address them in maybe an upcoming podcast or just in general. And if you're interested in our product line, feel free to reach out. More than happy to talk to you and see if we can guide you into the wonderful world of open source intelligence and generating actionable intelligence with these wonderful tools that we have to offer. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.